My parents treated me like a maid while my brother lived like a king. So when they called me ungrateful, I laughed. For what? Cleaning your house for free? Their shocked silence told me everything I needed to know. I was 12 years old when I first understood what I was to my parents. Not their daughter, not someone they cherished or cared for, just the unpaid help. It wasn't like I woke up one day and had a grand realization. No, it came in little moments, small pieces of evidence that, when put together, painted a picture I had refused to see for too long. I remember standing in the kitchen, washing a mountain of dishes after dinner, my fingers pruned from the water. My younger brother, Trevor, was sprawled out on the couch, his feet up on the coffee table, stuffing his face with chips while watching TV. Hey, Hannah, my mom called from the dining table, where she sat with my dad, sipping her tea. Make sure you wipe down the counters when you're done. And sweep the floor, too. It's looking dusty. I turned my head slightly, catching her eyes. Trevor made the mess. He can help. Trevor scoffed without looking away from the screen. Yeah, right? Trevor's busy, my dad chimed in. Just do what your mother says. I wanted to argue, but I already knew how that would go. Any protest would be met with sighs, eye rolls, and some variation of stop being difficult, Hannah. So I bit my tongue, finished the dishes, wiped the counters, and swept the damn floor while my parents and Trevor carried on like I was invisible. That was my life. Trevor was the prince, the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was the one who had to be responsible. It didn't matter that I had straight A's, that I did my chores without complaint most of the time, or that I stayed out of trouble. Nothing was ever enough. By the time I was 16, the resentment was boiling under my skin, but I kept my mouth shut. What was the point? I knew my parents' love, or whatever warped version of love they had, was conditional. Still, I had a plan. I was going to escape. College was my way out, and I worked my off to make sure I had that option. I spent nights studying until my eyes burned, applied for every scholarship I could find, and did everything in my power to ensure that when the time came, I wouldn't be stuck in that house, cleaning up after a family that never saw me as anything more than a maid. But I made the mistake of thinking they would be happy for me. I waited until the perfect moment, after dinner, when the table was clear and everyone was full and content. I took a deep breath, gripping the edge of the chair to keep my hands from shaking. I got accepted into UCLA, I said, my voice steady but my heart pounding. Mom barely looked up from her tea. That's nice, dear. Nice. My chest tightened. I got a full scholarship. Trevor snorted, slouching in his seat. Nerd. Dad exhaled sharply. And what exactly are you planning to do with that? I blinked. What do you mean? You're going to college, he said, like it was some ridiculous notion. For what? What are you studying? Business, I said carefully. I want a business. Mom cut in, shaking her head. You don't need college for that. You can learn on the job. I got a scholarship, I repeated, my patience thinning. I worked hard for this. It's a good opportunity. And who's going to help around here? She asked, setting her cup down with a soft clink. Silence filled the room. I stared at her, then at my dad. What? You're the only one who knows how to keep this place together, she said. Your brother is still young. He needs support. And I'm exhausted, Hannah. I can't do everything by myself. Trevor, who was literally eating a sandwich I had made for him, didn't even bother to pretend he was involved in this conversation. Dad sighed, rubbing his forehead like I was the unreasonable one. Hannah, you're a girl. You'll get married eventually. What's the point of wasting time and money on a degree you won't use? Something inside me cracked. Wasting money? They hadn't even offered to help with tuition. They didn't care about my future, only about the convenience of keeping me in the house to clean up after them. I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. You're joking, right? My mother frowned. Don't be disrespectful. Disrespectful? I scoffed. You've treated me like a maid my entire life, and now you want me to stay here and be your full-time servant? Mom's face twisted in that way it always did when I said something she didn't like. You're being dramatic. No, I'm not, I shot back. You know what's dramatic? Expecting me to give up my future to scrub your floors while Trevor sits on his, doing nothing. Trevor finally spoke up. Geez, why do you always make everything about you? I turned to him, my hands shaking from rage. Everything about me? I repeated. Are you serious? You don't lift a damn finger in this house. You get everything handed to you, while I've been cooking and cleaning since I was a kid. Trevor rolled his eyes. That's because you like cleaning. I stared at him, speechless. Like I liked it. Like it was my choice. Dad sighed, pushing back from the table. Enough. You're not going to college. That's final. Something cold and sharp settled in my chest. I took a breath. Watch me. Then, I stood up and walked away. I moved out 2 months later. They didn't help. They didn't even say goodbye. But for the first time in my life, I was free. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. For a while, I didn't look back. Moving to Los Angeles was the scariest and best thing I had ever done. My dorm room was tiny. My roommate snored like a dying lawnmower, and I barely had enough money to afford more than instant noodles and cheap cafeteria food. But I didn't care, because every morning I woke up knowing I was free. No more waking up early to make breakfast for an ungrateful family. No more hours spent scrubbing floors and washing dishes. No more hearing my parents gush over Trevor while treating me like an afterthought. I worked 2 part-time jobs while balancing classes. It was exhausting, but I loved every second of it because it was mine. My hard work benefited me for once. My parents never called. Not for my birthday. Not for the holidays. Not even when I made the dean's list my first year. The only time I ever heard from them was through my aunt, who sent the occasional text. Your mother was complaining that the house is a mess without you. Trevor is struggling with school. You should call them. I never did. I thought about them less and less. As the years passed, I built my own life. I graduated with honors, got a job at a marketing firm, saved up enough to move into my first apartment. And for the first time, I felt like I had control over my own future. Then one evening, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something in my gut told me to answer. The voice on the other end made my stomach drop. You need to come home, Trevor said. His voice was tight, almost panicked. Dad's sick. I gripped my phone, my mind racing. What do you mean sick? He's in the hospital, he said. It's bad. You should come. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I hadn't spoken to my father in years. Hadn't thought about him beyond the occasional memory I'd rather forget. And now I was supposed to just drop everything and go back. I almost said no. Almost told Trevor that whatever was happening had nothing to do with me. But something inside me, curiosity, guilt, something I couldn't name, made me hesitate. Fine, I muttered. I'll be there in the morning. The next day, I drove back to my childhood home for the first time in years. The moment I stepped inside, I knew nothing had changed. The house smelled the same, lemon-scented floor cleaner and stale coffee. The furniture was still arranged the way I remembered. The only difference was that it felt smaller. Or maybe I'd just grown. Mom was in the kitchen when I walked in. She turned at the sound of the door, her eyes widening in shock. Hannah. Her voice was breathless, like she couldn't believe I was real. I didn't say anything. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. Then, as if nothing had happened, she rushed forward, throwing her arms around me. Oh, thank God you're here, she said, pulling back to look at me. There's so much to do. The house is a mess. Your father needs help. And Trevor, well, he's overwhelmed. I blinked. Of course. Of course that's what this was about. Not I missed you. Not I'm sorry. Just we need you to clean up our mess again. I felt something in my chest tighten, but I forced a smile. Sure, Mom, I said. Her shoulders sagged in relief. She had no idea what was coming. I stayed silent as my mother led me into the house, her voice filling the space with a long list of things that needed to be done. The laundry's been piling up, and I haven't had time to get to it. The kitchen's a mess. Your brother's been so busy with everything. You know how he is. And your father, well, he needs a lot of care. I barely listened. Trevor was lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a single responsibility in the world. He looked up when I walked in, raising an eyebrow like I was a delivery person dropping off a package he didn't remember ordering. Wow, you actually showed up, he said. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I glanced around the house. The dishes in the sink, the overflowing laundry basket in the hallway, the dust collecting on the furniture. I let out a quiet breath. So this is what happens when their unpaid maid leaves. Mom kept talking, guiding me toward the hallway. Your father's resting now, but the doctor said he needs to eat healthy meals and the medications. Oh, I'll show you where they are. I followed her up the stairs, not because I cared about what she was saying, but because I wanted to see it for myself. And there he was, Walter Reeves, the man who had spent my entire childhood dismissing me, downplaying my achievements, and treating me like an afterthought, lay in a hospital bed set up in his own bedroom. His once strong frame looked thinner, weaker. His face was pale, his hair grayer than I remembered. I waited for the emotion to hit me. Some sadness, some sense of loss. But there was nothing. His eyes flickered open, and when he saw me, his expression barely changed. You finally decided to come home, he muttered. A statement, not a question. Not I'm glad you're here. Not I'm sorry for everything. Just entitlement. Like my presence was inevitable. Like of course I would return to take care of him. I tilted my head. Yeah, I guess I did. Mom exhaled in relief. Oh, Hannah, we really do need you right now. You're the responsible one, the reliable one. You always were. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Of course, Mom. Trevor leaned against the doorway, watching the scene unfold with his usual smirk. Good thing you're here. I've been handling everything by myself. I almost laughed at the sheer audacity of that statement. Instead, I took a slow breath. All right, let's play this game. For the next few weeks, I played the role they expected of me. I cooked the meals. I organized the medications. I cleaned up the house. And my mother, Oh, she glowed with satisfaction. Hannah, you're such a good daughter, she would say, beaming. I don't know what we would do without you. Trevor, predictably, did nothing. He let me do all the work, just like he always had. He sat back, relaxed, and let me handle the mess of a life he had been living in since I left. But what none of them realized was that I wasn't here to stay. I was here to watch them crumble. The first thing I did was get access to everything: bills, medical statements, property documents. Mom, of course, was more than happy to hand things over, because in her mind, I was stepping into my rightful role as the responsible one. And what I found? Debt. So much debt. Turns out, without their live-in maid holding everything together, things had spiraled fast. Medical bills, missed mortgage payments, late fees on credit cards. They were drowning. And Trevor? Oh, Trevor had his own mess. A pile of failed job applications, bank overdrafts, and a car payment he was months behind on. They thought I was here to fix it. But I had other plans. One morning, after making sure Dad had his breakfast and meds, I walked into the kitchen and set down a folder in front of my mother. "What's this?" she asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel. I folded my arms. "I've been going over the finances. Things aren't looking great." Her face fell. "Oh, well, I know things have been tight, but we've managed." I shook my head. "No, Mom, you haven't. You're 3 months behind on the mortgage. Dad's medical bills are stacking up. And Trevor," I turned to him, smirking, "well, he's a financial disaster." Trevor scoffed. "Oh, shut up, Hannah. You don't know what you're talking about." I ignored him. Mom's hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. "But you'll help us, right?" I tilted my head. "Help you?" "Yes," she said quickly. "You have a good job now, don't you? You can help with the bills, keep things afloat until we get back on our feet." I let that sit for a moment. Then I laughed. A sharp, amused laugh that made Trevor glare and Mom flinch. "For what?" I said, shaking my head. "Cleaning your house, for free." Silence. Thick, heavy silence. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. "Let me get this straight. You ignored me for years, dismissed my accomplishments, treated me like a maid, told me I wasn't worth investing in. And now, after everything, you want me to bail you out?" Mom opened her mouth, but no words came out. Dad, who had been wheeled in the room by Trevor, grumbled, "Enough, Hannah. This is your family. You have a duty." I cut him off with a smile. "No, Dad, I don't." I stood up, pushing the chair back with a slow scrape. "I'm not your servant. I'm not your caretaker. And I'm definitely not your financial plan." I grabbed my bag and pulled out a set of papers. "Oh, and by the way, I've already spoken to the bank. You're past the point of negotiating your debt. The house is going into foreclosure." Mom gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "No, no, we can't lose the house." I shrugged. "Well, maybe you should have thought about that before relying on free labor for all those years." Trevor shot to his feet. "You can't do this." I smirked. "I didn't do anything. You did." Dad tried to say something, but his voice was weak. Mom just kept shaking her head, whispering no, 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 like that would change reality. I walked toward the door. "Oh, and one last thing," I said, turning back to face them. "I left when I was 18 with nothing. No support, no money, nothing. And I built a life for myself. So I'm sure you'll figure it out." Then I walked out. I didn't look back. And for the first time in my life, I knew, really knew, I was finally free.